I'm filmmaker and transmedia artist Thomas Allen Harris, and you're watching The Artist Forum.
Welcome to the Artists Forum. My name is Michael Inge, and I'm your host for this segment. Today I'm excited to be able to sit down today and to speak with our first guest, highly acclaimed filmmaker and transmedia artist, Thomas Allen Harris. Thanks so much for being here today with us.
Thank you, Michael, for having me and for hosting.
I want to ask you about one of your projects, one of your most recent projects, Family Pictures USA. Tell me how you came up with the concept for that.
In some ways, it comes out of my long-term work. I've been making these personal memoir films for like almost 25 years, and exploring all kinds of things, but particularly around like the family album. And so whenever I've been showing the films, people would say, well, I wish you would do something that would help my family appreciate their archives and their family albums, in a way, and so when I was making my most recent feature documentary, I decided to create a transmedia project called Digital Diaspora Family Reunion, and we would go around and invite people to share their family photographs, and I would help them create a story with their family photographs, and over the 9 years of doing it, it evolved into a TV show.
Oh, wow.
And so we shot the pilot last summer, and so it's Family Pictures USA, and it's looking at rural communities and also cities through the lens of the family album.
I watched that pilot episode, and it was shot in Detroit. How did you choose Detroit as your first city?
Well, I feel like it was fate, right? Because a funder came to us and said, we want you to do an event in Detroit, the Digital Diaspora Family Reunion event. And we had been, kind of developing the TV show. And so we said, well, since we have the money, we have a location, and we had a partner, the Detroit Historical Society. Curators from the Detroit Historical Society had seen our project in the Bay Area, and they'd kept in touch and said, well, why don't you come and bring it here? And so it was kind of like this marriage of funding and partners, because anywhere we go, we develop and work with a variety of different partners. And so we decided to go to Detroit, and we spent about 6 months developing it. And what was interesting about Detroit is that it's like it's a border town. It's like right on the northern border, with Canada, and it's a frontier place, and you're going way back, and so it just had so much history, and it felt like it was very present, and it had a lot of drama and also trauma. Like at one point, people who were enslaved would get to Canada through Detroit, through Michigan.
Oh, yes.
And at another point, there were people who were enslaved there, and they were trying to get out of Michigan and Detroit, so they find their freedom. So it was like all this stuff, and you have this mapping of monuments that commemorate these things. It was at one point it was French, and then you have all these immigrants coming, as I mentioned, and in terms of also European immigrants and Middle Eastern immigrants, and so it's really a very interesting place to start our Family Pictures USA.
Well, we're going to show a short clip of that right now so we can share with our viewers a little bit of Family Pictures USA.
July 24th is considered the birthday of the city of Detroit. It is the birthday of the French arrival to the city of Detroit. Antoine de la Cadillac, who's considered the founder of Detroit, is really the Columbus of Detroit. The French come here in 1701, and many of them do live in the Lower East Side of what is now Detroit. When the French arrive here, there are a number of indigenous people, Native Americans, who are already here. The three larger groups are the Odawa, sometimes called the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, also known as the Potawatomi, and the Ojibwe, sometimes called the Chippewa. And the Odawa village is not that far from here. Their major settlement is in the Lower East Side of the city of Detroit. Today, what is there is a neighborhood known as Indian Village, and then the island that the French would name Ile-au-Couchon, but today we know it as Belle Isle. That was also part of the Ottawa settlement.
Chantal Henry is an activist working to preserve the legacies of her family and her people.
Bonjour. Gnu Kwayan Deshnakas, Maingin Dodum, Deshkan Zibin Dunjaba, Anishinaabe Kwayandao. When I grew up in elementary school, they used to be like, "You're not Native American." They used to always think I was Mexican. Native Americans, they don't exist anymore. They're all dead. You're not Native American. I'm like, how are you gonna tell me I'm not Native American? I live it every day of my life. My grandfather worked on the tallest tower and on the Renaissance Center. So it's about us just reclaiming who we are and letting people know the history of who we are here in Detroit.
Wow, that's a great show.
Thank you.
I really like how people had their individual story that they really wanted to share from their family photo. And it's like they were proud to bring that to the table and share it with others.
Yeah, and you know, it's amazing when people bring their family photograph and share it with a stranger. All types of things open up. You know, people think they're going to come with one story. You know, they have something in their head, but they don't realize they're coming with a story of the heart as well. And so there's this kind of like confluence of the head and the heart. You know, and there's also like discovery of history and people being proud. Like, you know, the Native American woman. You know, talking about, you know, her. People who lived on both sides of the border, which is, you know, for them, it's not a real border because they were going back and forth across the Detroit River, and then the families, you know, lived sometime in Canada, sometime in the United States, and so to have the perspective of, you know, Indigenous people, I think is going to be really important for our show, you know, so that we can begin to think about mapping of a particular place and time in a different way.
Yes. Tell me, Thomas, what other cities do you have in mind as you shoot more episodes?
Yeah, well, we are developing. We're moving south.
Oh,
so we
nice.
started at the northern part of America, and now we're moving south. So we are looking in North Carolina, and South Carolina, and South Florida, Southwest Florida, and so we're developing shows there with local public television stations, because that's kind of what we're doing. We're working with a local station to do outreach to their audience, and these particular stations are going to be rural-facing stations. So it's going to be a combination of cities and rural communities, and this is going to be the first time. You know, I'm a northerner, you know, New Yorker, sixth generation, although my grandmother was from Charleston, and so to go back, you know, to go down south and to be able to see things in this new kind of way, or discover America in this other kind of way is kind of exciting.
That sounds great, yeah.
And you're from the south, so.
Yeah, you're going to like this. I'll tell you where to go, where to visit, and I'll definitely tell you where you can eat.
Oh, good.
Tell me, so you're based in New York, and you're from New York. Tell me a little bit about your journey in discovering filmmaking, and how you found it or how it found you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, I started out as a photographer, and in fact, when I was in college, I did science. So I was
wow.
like, yeah, my mom is a scientist, or was a scientist. She is retired, and so but I always knew I was an artist and, you know, a creative person. And so even though I was majoring in science, initially it was biochemistry, then biology. I took writing and photography classes, and then I moved to Europe. I got a grant to go to Europe and started working as a photographer and a stylist there in Holland and France in particular, and Italy as well. And then I came back and said, you know, well, when I was in France, I discovered cinema, French cinema. I was like, you know, especially, you know, the old French cinema. And it was just like kind of a combination of the language, you know, the poetry of the language, and also the visuals of, you know, the photography. And so I just like, it was like, wow, this is, I feel like this is my, you know, my medium. And so I came back and started making films in this country, and I initially started in television, and then I started making more experimental films, like you know, around queer identity and also African diasporic identity. And at one point I was wondering, you know, this is like in the late 80s, early 90s, how my films would be, you know, if they would be commercial enough, and you know, you know, now so many years later, it's like I'm right on time, you know. So it's so in some ways doing the family pictures and doing the transmedia stuff, you know, where I'm creating a movement where people kind of rethink the meaning of the family album in the digital age. You know, I mean, most people are not printing their images out. You know, they're kind of like in social media, and we no longer have this book, you know, that tells the family story visually, you know. And so, you know, I'm thinking, well, can we morph the meaning of the album, you know, to one, kind of like think about how we use it in the digital age, and also how we use it as a tool to like show ourselves, each other. You know, so here I am with you, and my family is like all around me. I can share them with you, you know, and then you can make discoveries, you know, and we can kind of like, it's a way to talk about the multidimensionality of ourselves and our identities.
Tell me, as an African American and an out gay male, what role those parts of you play in your storytelling and your art making?
Well, I grew up partly in East Africa. When I was in junior high, we moved there with my mom, and my stepdad is from South Africa, so I was always part of a larger community that was involved in kind of like movement politics, you know, the anti-colonial politics, and then also, you know, as an out you know, gay man, I was, you know, involved in the, you know, movement in terms of queer rights and, you know, and representation. And so I've always thought about, like, you know, the complexity around how we kind of represent ourselves, you know, in images, in media, and also in some ways how we create family, you know, beyond just the nuclear family, like, you know, with the diaspora, you know, you're having this larger community that's connected with, you know, queer folks, you have this multiracial community that's connected, you know, and, you know, I was one of the people, or I guess I was blessed because I didn't necessarily have to leave my family to embrace my different identities. And my brother, Lyle Ashton Harris, artist as well, is you know, so we were two queer folks in the family, and then there were also other queer folks in our family, like we had, you know, a great aunt and you know, all the other family members that we didn't actually even know at the time because they had passed away. And so yeah, I feel like as a out, you know, diasporic queer man, like there's a way in which we can anchor the family, you know, in a way, because we kind of, you know, thinking about Native American two spirits, you know, we can see things from many different angles, and it's you know, we can kind of help ground the family story in a lot of indigenous societies, there's this role for like
Yes.
two-spirit people, and so thinking about queerness, not simply about who we're romantically or sexually charged or like a certain flamboyance, but also this other aspect, which is very old as well.
Aside from family pictures, what else are you working on?
I'm working on developing my first feature fiction film.
Oh, wow.
And it's a coming-of-age story of an evangelical young man who's the son of a minister and is kind of trying to find his way. And in this town, a stranger comes, and there's a lot of mystery that the stranger brings, and he changes everything. And so it's a story that I'm working with partners to write, and it's actually a script that came to me, and I'm doing some rewriting on it right now and developing it. And it will be shot in the Caribbean, and so it's exciting because it's a new, it's kind of a new language I'm working with. Even though I've worked with actors, not a lot, but I've worked with actors, and but this is exclusively fiction. So that's something that is coming down the pike.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, look for it.
Yeah. Your other project, About Face, the evolution of a black producer. You were one of, I guess, 7 in all to be a part of this. And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, when I first started my career in media, I was working for public television and local public television in New York, and it was at the time when there was a lot of ACT UP, AIDS resistance, or not so much resistance, but fighting for rights for people with HIV, and in terms of medicine, in terms of protection, legal protections, etc., and to be visible positively, and so I did a lot of coverage of what was going on in the streets at that time, and I was one of the few people who actually covered the first Day Without Art, in which was created by visual aids, and they enlisted, basically it's a movement now, December 1st, where all arts organizations, go black, and so I covered the first one, and I pitched a show, and it really opened my voice to the ability to be an activist and a journalist and an artist, working in mass media, and so I went back to my archives with this commission from Visual Aids, because they commissioned 7 people, and I was able to find this amazing material and tell the story of like the early '90s through this material.
Yeah, it's kind of like a bit of a time vault, because when we look back, that's a very important part of our history, and it's not like it was, but we have to remember. I think it's very important to remember the way things were, and we've come a long way. And you actually have a very, very young Kerry Washington before she became Olivia Pope in there. I saw that. She was on a show about adolescence and AIDS that I did, and I had these young people come in who were doing this. They were all actors, and they were traveling around educating young people around safe sex, sexuality, and I always, after I left television, I always would see Kerry Washington. I was like, she looks so familiar. Yeah, you didn't remember.
I didn't remember, 'cause she was a 13-year-old, young lady, girl, and then I saw her, in her 20s, and so it was a big change, from 13 to like 23, right?
Yeah.
And so, but to go back and see it, and then see her and realize, oh my God, that's why she always seems so, familiar to me. And so it was actually in this commission that I was actually able to go into my archives, and in some ways it's very similar to what I'm doing with Family Pictures. I'm asking people to go into their, their family albums, which is, a family's archive, and to create new stuff with it. And so that's kind of my role is, creating new projects with archival material.
And now we're going to show you a clip of About Face, the evolution of a black producer.
HIV infection among teenagers is on the rise, especially in New York City. We have 3% of America's adolescent population, but 20% of the nation's reported cases of AIDS among 13 to 21-year-olds. and HIV infection is touching the lives of young men and women alike. Good evening, I'm Paul Gorman. As the rate of AIDS grows among our teenagers, young people and adults are seeking ways to talk thoughtfully about sex and to save lives. You'll meet some of them tonight and get a sense of their struggle. But first, we'll see a performance by Kerry Washington, an actress with Star Theater, part of the AIDS prevention program at Mount Sinai Adolescent Health Center.
Eric is this guy I've been dating, you know. He's so perfect, you know, curly brown hair, green eyes. He's real tall and built, 22 years old. He's so sweet. I mean, when he comes to pick me up at school, every girl's head turns. You know, I hop in, throw my backpack in the back seat, and when everybody else has to take the bus and the train, I go wherever I want. I mean, we do everything together. I mean, I lost it with Eric. But he's the reason why I'm here in this doctor's office. I'm here to take some kind of AIDS test that I don't know much about. See, Eric was a drug dealer, and I knew that. You know, I mean, the money had to come from somewhere. The earrings, the watch. But what I didn't know was that Eric was doing the drugs. You know, I mean, he was shooting up. So the other day, a friend of mine told me that he had AIDS or HIV or something. But, you know, it didn't hit me until this counselor came to my school, and she started talking about AIDS and HIV and unprotected sex, and I realized that when we did it, we didn't use anything. I mean, he told me everything would be okay. He told me to trust him. So I called him, and he said, hey, you know, I'm not worried. Don't worry about it. So he's not worried about me. You know, I mean, I thought he loved me. He said that he loved me. I mean, I'm 14. How am I supposed to deal with all this? Well, if you test positive, you may or may not get AIDS. I mean, this pamphlet makes no sense. I mean, I just don't get it. I don't know where to go. Maybe I should go to the counselor from my school, but how do I start? I mean, none of this makes any sense to me. Look, I know one thing. I'm getting out of here.
Your film, Through a Lens Darkly, was nominated for lots of awards, won some awards. It really got critical acclaim. Tell me what that did for you and where that kind of set you after that project.
Wow. Yeah, that film opened at the Film Forum in New York. Mm-hmm. They saw the film in Berlin, and they gave us 2 weeks at the Film Forum, and
wow.
It got extended to almost 6 weeks.
Wow.
You know, it was so popular, and you know, with very little marketing, and it was a documentary, you know,
mm-hmm.
which was pretty amazing. And then from there, we went all over the country, and it got me invited into the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences.
Oh, wow.
You know, it won an African Oscar. It won the Best Documentary or Social Justice Award at the Santa Barbara Film Festival. It won the NAACP Image Award. Wow. It's like a whole bunch of awards, and it's amazing. I'm still showing that film, and you know, in part it was based on a book by Deborah Willis, inspired by the book Reflections in Black, about, you know, drawing from her research on Black photographers and their contribution to American photography, which had been absented. And so my interpretation of the book was to really put it in the context of the larger images of African American, or the more dominant ones, you know, which were kind of more rooted in stereotype, and you know, and also enslavement. And so to talk about how African Americans were struggling against those images, mm-hmm. and how the images were being used. So it became a kind of meditation on representation, you know, and across the field of photography, from the very beginning of photography to the present day, and you know, including figures like Frederick Douglass, who was the most photographed American of the century, and you know, I came to that conclusion because I was looking at the photographs. This is before the Scott, right after we finished the film, you know, a book came out actually, you know, certifying that fact, you know, and we interviewed about 56 people, mm-hmm. approximately 20-something artists, photographers, and then about 25 scholars. And we ended up kind of looking at the whole 160, 70 years of that photography has been in existence, but going back and forth across time, because many of the artists and photographers we interviewed use history as a creative endeavor. And so we were able to actually really do this non-linear but linear kind of project, and that in many ways paralleled the Digital Diaspora Family Reunion project.
Thomas, I'd like to ask you, we have a lot of viewers that are artists, and many of them are up-and-coming new artists, and we usually ask guests what words of wisdom or what advice you would pass on to another up-and-coming filmmaker or artist.
Well, the word of advice would be to follow your heart and make what is true to you. What's really amazing right now, which is very different than when I was coming up, is all these different distribution platforms, and you could find whatever audience you want to find that can support your work. And in fact, I'm bringing out all these old titles, and they're finding new distribution, now. And so, and also seek out mentorships. I've been mentoring a lot of people, and I get mentored as well, and so it's really important, that community.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest here today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. Tell us where we can find out more about you and get more information about upcoming projects and find where we can see your work.
Okay, so you could see my work at, I have two websites, oneworldonefamily.me, and that's the numeral One World, One Family, and also you can find me at familypicturesusa.com, and if you have a special story around your family album, you could reach out and we could profile you on social media. And then people can follow me on Twitter or on Instagram. I have we have a couple of different Instagram accounts. So yeah, reach out.
Great. All right. My name is Michael Inge, and thank you so much for watching The Artists Forum.